Greetings, loves. It is I, Tactical Girlfriend. Welcome back to the channel. I hope everybody's doing well. Today, I finally have for you another firearm review. Now, this one is not a particularly new firearm. It's the Gen 5 Glock 19, which has been out for about 5 years. With my luck, Glock is probably going to release the Gen 6 tomorrow, but regardless, I have this in my possession. I recently acquired one, and I do have some thoughts which I want to give to you. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, before we get into all the technical mumbo jumbo, I do want to just talk about my relationship with Glock, which is there is none. I bought this Gen 5 Glock 19 FS with my cold hard-earned cash. Nothing was exchanged between parties. They certainly don't know who I am. So regardless, this is my firearm. I have no interest in any biases whatsoever. No motive on selling anything like this. In general, on this channel, I don't try to sell things anyway. I simply just like to highlight products that I have had the opportunity to try out. This just happens to be one of them. Now, why exactly did I get a Glock 19 to review for you? Well, I do think it's very topical. I think I should be able to talk about Glocks because they are ubiquitous. They're one of the most common handguns on the market. Lots of people shoot them. These things also kind of started the Striker 9 polymer game. The CZP-10C, which I've had for some years and carry every day, is an excellent example of the evolution from Glock that they started. But regardless, I really think that this is something that I should be able to talk about, so I grabbed it. I'm gonna have some fun with it, maybe do some upgrades, see how I feel about it. I may eventually actually like this more than my CZ and it may end up replacing it, but regardless, where I'm at right now is just with a pretty stock Glock here, minus the Streamlight TLR-7A that I've attached to it. Otherwise, this is its default configuration, so I just kind of wanted to see out of the box what it can do and how it compares in my experience to other handguns that I've shot. Now, I'm gonna first start out by getting dirty, so I'm gonna put my gloves on. I'm gonna pull the barrel out of this gun so I can show you the heart of this handgun. Now, first, we're gonna do a safety check, remove the magazine, make sure it's clear, cool, pull the trigger. Now, there is a takedown lever on either side of this frame. What you're gonna do is simply pull them down and pull the slide back about 5 millimeters and then slide it forward. And then it comes out, take out your guide rod and recoil spring, and then the barrel pops out. Now, this barrel is a 4.02 inch barrel. It's what Glock calls in their Gen 5 the marksman barrel. It's got polygonal rifling. It's apparently an improved design from the previous generation. It's more accurate. Generally, I think a Glock barrel, no matter what the generation, is going to be more accurate than the shooter, so don't really know if that's anything beyond marketing hoo-ha, but whatever. That is what it is. And it's got a really nice recessed crown in the front, so if you ding the barrel, this thing falls out of your holster and it hits a rock or something, it's okay. The crown of the barrel isn't necessarily damaged, which normally would affect your ballistics. So, great idea, great design. Barrel otherwise seems solid. It's well coated in its finish and seems fairly substantial. And yeah, you know, I mean, it's nothing too fancy. It's a Glock barrel, but the Gen 5 one seems like a really smart design, and it is a good improvement on the previous Gen 4. While we got this thing apart, let's talk about the guide rod and the recoil spring assembly. Now, there's 2 recoil springs as standard on every Glock, and it's all built on this polymer guide rod. A lot of people are gonna freak out and be like, oh no, my guide rod's made out of polymer, it's gonna melt. So is half of your gun. You're shooting a Glock, it's extremely reliable, you're not gonna run into any problems. Unless you're shooting a Glock 18 and you're firing off hundreds of rounds in succession, then yes, maybe this will melt then. Otherwise, don't worry about it. This is like the last thing you need to replace in any handgun. So chill out, it's fine. Also, they enhanced this one from the previous generation to adjust the timing to improve reliability, especially on worn out magazines. This just greatly increases the window of timing to make sure that everything gets taken off the top of the magazine and put into the chamber every single time, no matter the state of the gun or the magazine. So honestly, great for them to improve that. I don't know the actual statistics on it and how much of an improvement it is, but hey, we love seeing improvement regardless. Now, with the handgun fully assembled again, let's talk about the slide. The slide is coated in Glock's NDLC or diamond-like coating. This finish is apparently an improvement upon the previous generation. It's supposed to be tougher. I've ran about 2,000 rounds to this thing, and I've been extremely abusive to it. So far, the finish looks like new on the slide, which is good. I think time will ultimately tell whether this is actually better than the previous generation, but regardless, it's off to a good start. Now, it's also got front slide serrations on the FS version, which is quickly becoming the standard base model for Gen 5 Glock 19s. And yeah, I'm very happy to see that. I don't think that the slide serrations are anywhere near as aggressive as they are in the CZ P10C, where I can easily grab those, no problem. These are just a little bit shallow, but they're perfectly usable, honestly. Very, very minor complaint, but something to note. Also, the Gen 5 has a beveled edge around the muzzle on both the slide and on the FS version, also on the frame. This is to improve holstering, make it a little bit easier to guide it into your holster so it doesn't get locked up on the edges of that holster. As far as the sights go, on the FS model, you get the standard plastic Glock sights with a dot on the front post and a bracket on the rear. On the Gen 5, they actually open up the rear bracket a bit more so you can get faster sight acquisition. I personally really like these sights as far as acquiring them goes. They're very quick, very easy, very natural for me to acquire. I don't have to think at all about them. They just seem to be very intuitive. Yes, they're made out of plastic. They're not the toughest in the world. I almost certainly will be replacing these, but I think that they also get a really bad rap. They are effective, they work. You're probably not going to break them unless you're doing some really crazy stuff with your gun. Generally, they're good to go. Now, I still do recommend that you do replace them with something more robust, such as an aluminum or a steel sight, but regardless, it's a good starting point. Moving on, let's talk about the slide release. On the Gen 5, the slide release is a lot bigger, it sticks out more, it's just generally a very generous slide stop / slide release. And actuating it is extremely easy. Now, on the CZ P10C that I'm used to shooting, that slide stop sits very flush against the frame. It's kind of raised, it's really out of the way. It requires a very intentional motion to actuate it. Now, on the Glock 19 Gen 5, this is just honestly a little too much for me in my experience because I'm used to the CZ P10C. Also, as a result, it kind of hangs out there a bit with a Bob Vogel style grip with a very forward thumb along the entire side of the frame. I started to get some interference with the slide stop that caused some feeding issues. Specifically, the slide would lock back after every single shot because I was pushing it up with the palm of my hand. Now, that was a very subjective issue. That is a training issue for sure. I simply moved my hand back a bit more on the frame here, and then I had all that space there, all that real estate to clear the slide stop and not have that issue. So it simply required an adjustment. It's something that I'm not used to doing. It's something that I'm not really stoked on because I do kind of like the way I've been gripping handguns for the last few years, but hey, if it works, it works. That is just something to note. I also might opt to get a Cogworks raised and extended slide stop just so it's a little bit higher and a little bit more out of the way, while still being very easy to actuate. Just a potential upgrade idea, but regardless, it's important to differentiate between a training issue and a hardware issue, and this is absolutely no strike against the gun. The thing works great, it just simply might require an adjustment. Oh, also a side note, the slide release is ambidextrous, so lefties rejoice. Now, of course, let's talk about the body. Body is obviously polymer, so it's really nice and lightweight. Unloaded, this entire thing weighs 23.63 ounces. As far as compact handguns go, that's pretty dang good. And that's kind of what Glock is known for. It's known for those weight savings. Tupperware guns are the way of the future, and polymer certainly is too. Also, it's got a flared magwell, so mag insertions are a piece of cake. No problem there. Also, one thing to note, on the base model of the Gen 5s when they first came out, they did have a cutaway at the very bottom of the grip here in the front. That was to allow the user to pull out and rip out mags that are seized and stuck inside the magwell with ease. They actually got rid of that in the FS version, which is quickly becoming the standard base model, and they are starting to phase that feature out. But you might see that around there. That is just something to be aware of. Talking more specifically about the grip, there are no more finger grooves on the Gen 5. Thank God. I know that's a very hotly debated topic because it is completely subjective. I hate finger grooves. Other people love them. They just don't fit my hands. I've got green beans for fingers. They just honestly don't really line up at all with those finger grooves. So I'm very, very thankful that they got rid of those. It allows me to more dynamically grip the gun and really make it conform more to my hand, as opposed to having a preset area to put my fingers, which I just don't think really gives me any advantage, nor does it fit me. So some people gained something, some people lost something. I'm personally a fan of that. Also on the grip, we have really nice texturing all the way around, on the back, the front, and the sides of the grip. Really decent, honestly, as far as gripability goes, if that's a word. It is now. I can grab this gun and continually shoot it in rapid succession, no problem. The grip is sufficient. I also think it's a good balance, because if you are concealed carrying this, you don't want it just ripping your abdomen to shreds if you're in appendix position or whatever. So honestly, they struck a very good balance with the kind of grip texture that they have on here. Now I might end up stippling this anyway, because I could always use more grip. You can't get too much of it, honestly, but that is a very subjective thing. Regardless, I think the Gen 5 really knocked it out of the park as far as the grip texture goes. Also, if you're not crazy about the back strap, you can always change it out. They actually include 4 other ones for you to use, which is really cool. There's a bunch of different combinations that you can use to better customize this to your hands. So good on them for that. I do think that is very important. I actually have not played around with the grips enough, but I will. And regardless, I just think that most things should come standard with these regardless. So yeah, good on you, Glock. Also, a very subjective note, I do want to compare the grip to the CCP-10C. The grip on the CCP-10C is taller, whereas the Glock 19 is definitely a bit more stubby. That's okay. I can still fit my hand completely around this, no problem whatsoever. It is just something to note. Also, the grip on the CCP-10C is definitely more vertical, like most handguns, compared to a Glock. Glocks definitely have a bit more of an angle to them. That just simply means that I have to torque and bring my wrists forward a bit more when I'm shooting a Glock, which is perfectly fine. I've honestly always shot Glocks really well, and as much as I try to hate them, I can't really stay mad at them for that reason, and I think that is because of that grip. It actually does make me use a more aggressive grip style, so there might be something to that. Also, the beaver tail between these two is definitely a little bit notable. The Glock has a shallower beaver tail, whereas the CCP-10C has a much higher, more aggressive beaver tail for better recoil management. Do I think that's going to make or break the platform? Absolutely not. You also have different back straps that you can try with the Glock 19, so it's not the end of the world, but it is a very small little thing to note. These are purely subjective notes as a CC shooter and now Glock shooter. So take that into consideration, and also with a big grain of salt. Moving on, let's talk about the magazine release. Now on the Gen 5 compared to the Gen 4, they're very similar. Unlike the Gen 3, which is very narrow and sticks out high, on the Gen 4 and Gen 5, you have a fairly large rectangle that sits pretty flat and flush and fairly shallow against the frame. In my experience, this means that you have to very intentionally press it down. Not very tactile. Under stress, it's pretty difficult, honestly, compared to the CCP-10C, which again, I'm used to. It's totally a training issue. This doesn't have that much resistance to it. It just requires slightly different thumb angle when I actually actuate it. Now, it also can flip to the other side for full ambidexterity, which is really cool. Now, personally, I'm not too crazy about the magazine release. I'm probably going to replace it for something that is just a bit more pronounced and easier to actuate. Now, let's talk about one of the most important components of any firearm, and that's going to be the trigger. The trigger on the Gen 5 is improved. They did actually enhance the firing pin safety, as well as the trigger spring. The trigger system itself uses the safe action system from Glock, which is basically a safety on the trigger itself in the form of a blade. They did round this out in the Gen 5 to just make it a little easier and more comfortable to actuate. And without actuating the safety, the entire trigger system does not actually move. So it's a really good safety mechanism, and I do really like that. Also, because the Gen 5 trigger is improved, I did try to test this in my own experience. And yeah, I definitely noticed that the Gen 5 trigger is actually pretty decent for a Glock, which I know isn't saying much because Glock triggers out of the factory are usually garbage, but honestly, this one is the best one yet. So Good on them for at least trying to make it better. I'm probably still going to replace it, but hey, it actually is pretty nice. Let's actually ghost that. So as far as the trigger pull goes, you got a few millimeters of take up, and then you hit a pretty decently defined wall. It does turn a little mushy up until that point, but you definitely feel the wall. And then as you pull back, very crisp, easy let off, not very far either. Also in the Gen 5, they did decrease the reset length, so it does reset fairly quickly, which is really nice. And again, yeah, easy pull. Honestly, it's nothing to write home about, but as far as Glock triggers go, I definitely see this as a huge improvement. Also, the trigger pull averages to be about 4 pounds and 13 ounces on my Glock. That's neither too light nor too heavy. I think that's just right. It sits perfectly in that Goldilocks zone. Talk about another really important part here, and that's the magazine. These come standard with a capacity of 15 rounds. You have a window for each round, and they're all numbered, so you can keep track of how you're loading your magazines and how much ammo you got for quick reference. Everything that you know and love about OEM Glock magazines is here in this Gen 5, but they also included an orange follower. They took a leaf out of Magpul's book and they started incorporating those, and those are really good to reference as you're loading your magazines. You can also see them through the window, so it's even easier to reference the round count that you have in your magazine. All around, I just generally think that followers should be orange or some bright color. Also, the base plate is extended and is beveled. Therefore, it's comfortable but also easy to rip out of your magazine well in case it's seized up in there. Also, you get 3 of these with your Glock 19, as opposed to the 2 that I got with my CZ-P10C that left me feeling a little bit ripped off. Also, these are cheaper than CZ-P10C mags, so all around, huge win there. Also, previous generation mags are backwards compatible with the Gen 5. They just simply don't have all of the same features, but they work just fine. Now, it is important to note, on Gen 5 Glocks, the bore does sit higher than the lower rail on the frame. It's very, very slight, but it can make a difference in terms of holster fit. Generally, most holsters, previous generations included, should fit the Gen 5 just fine, but you just might want to note that it might fit a little tighter than you would expect. Now, on the Safariland 6354DO, I have no problem whatsoever. That fits in there, locks in place just fine, all good. I also have a Gorilla Tactical Low Pro Light Compatible and Enigma Ready Kydex holster. This also fits in nice and snug, but no problem. As far as torture tests go, who am I kidding? It's a Glock. There's basically nothing I could effectively do that would amount to a decent torture test that someone else hasn't already done. I suppose I could just throw this thing around a few times and see if it works, which I did. And that's basically the Gen 5 Glock 19 in a nutshell. These puppies retail on street price for about $540, which is not a lot of money, but it's also not a lot of money. As far as handguns go, it's a pretty average price. You can also get on the Blue Label program if you're a first responder or military, active or retired. Or you can just simply get one used because everyone and their mother shoots Glock, and the Gen 5s have been out for 5 years now, so honestly, you're probably going to be able to find something somewhere that is accessible for you. Also, I just generally recommend Glocks for anybody who's looking for a decent handgun. Out of the box, they're just going to be a better choice for most people just because they're ubiquitous, they're common, they're easy to use, they're extremely reliable, very well proven, and the parts availability is excellent and the aftermarket's even better. So it's honestly a pretty easy street. I don't think that they're out of the box the best thing that you can get for the money, but you can definitely customize them to you, and that is very attractive to a lot of people, if not most shooters. So with all that ease comes a lot of options, which can be overwhelming, but that's a great problem to have. I generally recommend Glocks to anybody who is looking for a decent and reliable handgun. You can get the Glock 17 if you need a full size. You can get the 19 for a compact. You can get the 43 or the 26 for a subcompact. There's so many good options. They're all based on the same tried and true design. And yeah, I think as far as this Glock 19 goes, I'm probably going to upgrade it as time goes on. There's tons of options out there to make the thing even better than it already is. So I certainly will start that journey here shortly, and I will document it and give my thoughts and talk about my whole process there, so stay tuned. And that's all the Glock talk I've got for you today. I really hope that you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, please be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell too. Also, if you've got your own feelings or thoughts or experiences with Glocks in general, I'd love to hear more about it in the comments below, so feel free to chime in. As always, I also want to give a huge thank you to everybody who's supporting this channel on Patreon. I really couldn't do it without you. That is how this channel keeps its lights on, literally and figuratively. So if you do want to go chip in, you can always go to patreon.com/tacticalgf. The biggest contributors are named at the end of the video. And that's a wrap. I really appreciate you all tuning in. Please be good to each other out there. And as always, please take care. Bye!